to week 5 of the Yahoo Q&A. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, here from Establish the Run. And as I typically do at the beginning of these Q&A streams, as the questions begin flowing in, I like to start with what I believe is the most important topic of the week heading into Sunday. And this week, it's obviously the available running backs that everyone is coveting for injuries off the waiver wire, most likely. I do think a few of them are being overblown and their potential ceilings are questionable at best. But let's get into those options, because the top one that I still can't believe is even available, given that he's been the best waiver pickup for 2 weeks in a row now, is Woody Marks. We've seen Woody Marks' share of the team's touches and route participation increase in every game so far through week 4. And more importantly, Dario Gumbawale be removed altogether from the offense the last 2 weeks. So rather than being like it was the first 2 games, a 3-headed timeshare, it became 2 backs for Houston. And then you just simply bet on the more athletic and more efficient player, which is very clearly Woody Marks at this stage of Nick Chubb's career. And that's what's happened, is that Woody Marks has now beat out Nick Chubb altogether against this injury-riddled Ravens defense that has allowed the most catches per game to opposing running backs. So Woody Marks, very easily the best running back pickup, and it's not close. Next up, I do believe it's Rashad White, wherever he's available. So far, the news is that Bucky Irving is not only expected to miss this upcoming game against the Seahawks, but potentially a second one next week. And so that leaves us with Rashad White as the natural fill-in. Bucky Irving only missed 1 game last year. And although that's a small sample, he did out-touch Sean Tucker 19-3 in that 1 game. So we believe he's going to come out and naturally be the team's workhorse running back. Not only that, but we know Rashad White's profile is a pass-catching running back. And I mentioned Baltimore leading the league in catches per game allowed to opposing running backs. Seattle has actually led the league in yards per game, 66.5 allowed to opposing running backs. So it's a terrific matchup for Rashad White off the waiver wire. Again, not only this week, but we believe it's because he's going to be a 2-week starter. And as we find ourselves in a situation where Michael Carter and Amari DiMercato, who I'll get to in a moment, are coveted pieces, especially in deeper leagues off the waiver wire, you have to remember when we're targeting Rashad White, in some cases, in deeper formats where you have the bench space, you might not have it in 10-team leagues because basically every player is good in a 10-team league. But Sean Tucker should also be added because that allows you to be ahead of spending $40 or however much you're going to on Fab for example, Rashad White this week. By simply picking up Sean Tucker, Trevor Etienne, since now it looks like Chuba Hubbard's also going to mix the next 2 games. That's how we don't waste our Fab and just think ahead to week 6 rather than playing exclusively for week 5 and paying above market price on the waiver wire. And that brings me to the next player, Rico Dowdle. Because I think Rico Dowdle is the 3rd best pickup among running backs this week, well over the Cardinals running backs. And I would absolutely start him over Michael Carter or Amari DiMercato. No questions asked. We've seen Rico Dowdle be Carolina's backup this year and play behind Chuba Hubbard. Last game, for example, 39% of the snaps. And those who simply look at the box score on the surface are not going to see behind the scenes. They're not going to notice that Trevor Etienne, yes, had 7 carries, but all of them came on the last drive with Andy Dalton down 42-6. We don't put any kind of weight into that type of garbage time usage. Whereas Rico Dowdle is the team's backup and projects to lead this team in touches without Chuba Hubbard on Sunday. Not only that, but if we're playing matchups to get ahead of week 6, it's the Dolphins this week, who are 26th in success rate against the run, and the Cowboys next week, who are 23rd. Two of the juiciest matchups possible for fantasy football. So yes, we absolutely want Rico Dowdle over the Cardinals running backs. Then that takes me to the next usable pieces in Amari Gianmarcato and Michael Carter. I don't like when people abuse last year's splits with Michael Carter coming in for the last 3 games. Because remember, he was only active and only played because Amari Gianmarcato was injured. So I don't really put any stock into that. But I do know that Amari Gianmarcato, for his entire career, has been a third down back, has never been entrusted with the majority of the team's touches, whereas Michael Carter profiles as more of the early down option. And at least this week, against a completely useless Titans coaching staff, offense, defense, we think that the Cardinals are probably going to comfortably win that game, as shown by another poorly coached team in the Texans, who quite easily shut out the Titans 26-0. And if that is the case, if we're projecting that game script, then Michael Carter's the one who profiles better for at least this upcoming week against the Titans. It is a different situation where, unlike Bucky Irving and Chuba Hubbard, who again we're projecting to miss the next 2 weeks at most, Trey Benson out now for the next 4 to 6 games, James Conner done for the year. So at least the leash for Michael Carter and Amari Gianmarcato are longer. But again, they're not better starts in either of the next 2 weeks than Rashad White or Rico Dowdle if those two stay healthy and the starters are out. And so given that we have a runway projecting for more than just 1 week, again, I think you quite easily just skip over the Cardinals running backs in favor of Woody Marks, Rashad White, and Rico Dowdle in that order. And then you can pick up Michael Carter and Gianmarcato. As I explained, no one knows what's going to happen with the Cardinals running backs. And even Zonovan Knight, who's referred to as Bam Knight, may be involved in a 3-headed committee. And a 3-headed committee for Arizona is a disaster for fantasy, and no one's going to get there in that case. But that's the range of outcomes. And so that's why we prefer the guys we can project for far more touches than any kind of Cardinals rotation. Beyond that, when we're talking about stashes to be ahead of, then obviously, as I mentioned, Sean Tucker, because if Rashad White does get injured, then Sean Tucker would start next week for the Bucs. Trevor Etienne, because if Rico Dowdle gets injured, then Trevor Etienne starts next week for the Panthers in that great spot against the Cowboys. And Isaiah Davis is the other one. I fully expect Breece Hall not only to have immense success against the Cowboys, but to be an every touch back, given that even his pass catching profile didn't go away with Braylon Allen getting more carries. Breece Hall had out-targeted Braylon Allen before Allen got moved to IR, 13-3 on the entire year. And on that opening drive, remember, Braylon Allen had 4 touches before his fumble at the goal line to Breece Hall's 4. So they were, at least at the beginning of the game, working towards Braylon Allen and Breece Hall being in a truer timeshare. Isaiah Davis ran just 6 fewer routes than Breece Hall this past week as a pass-catching option. He even showed that last year, Davis did. But I don't expect Isaiah Davis to be actually treated alongside Hall against Dallas. Having said that, with Allen out of the way, if Breece Hall were injured, now we're starting Isaiah Davis for a number of weeks, not just next week. So Davis is another stash to be ahead of. And finally, among all of those, we should also not forget about Rashad Smith because, again, the point of the waiver wire, similar to a stock market, is to buy at lowest points. And that's what hopefully you all did with Woody Marks last week. He was my number 1 pickup in the Establish the Run waiver wire, again, last week, before his breakout. And that's what could be happening with Rashad Smith for the Chiefs as well. Bottom on this list of pickups, given the turmoil that's happened at his position this week. But Rashad Smith's snap rate has increased in every game. And Isaiah Pacheco, who's very droppable, because you're never going to use Isaiah Pacheco, and Kareem Hunt clearly have not separated themselves whatsoever, which hopefully, like this last game, albeit in a blowout, that leads to Rashad Smith having more touches. It's only a speculative ad. You shouldn't start Rashad Smith at all unless you're in a deep, deep league where you're truly desperate. But Smith can still be stashed and put on your deep bench in case he suddenly gets immense usage over the next 2 weeks. Having said that, let's go ahead and get into some of these questions. Do we like A.J. Brown or Jordan Mason this week? And it is very easily A.J. Brown. We talked about David Montgomery and how he was an easy player to bench last week against the Browns. And Jordan Mason carries the same skill set that, in my opinion, just like David Montgomery, will not allow him to succeed overseas. I also expect the Browns to win that game, given that the Vikings will be starting 3 offensive linemen, and Carson Wentz still under pressure, 31 dropbacks just in 2 weeks, under pressure, 9 sacks and a fumble. This isn't a betting show, but even the Browns defense is 18-1 to score a touchdown. I'm betting that. You don't have to. I'm 100% betting that because it just seems like a game that Carson Wentz is going to be absolutely destroyed and overwhelmed in the pocket. So we talk about Jordan Mason, what he brings to the table, and just think about it. The same player as David Montgomery as an early down bruiser, and we've seen now Montgomery, Derrick Henry, Chase Brown, and Josh Jacobs combine for 57 carries, 108 yards, and 1.8 yards per carry against Cleveland's front 7. So, not a game where if you have a situation like A.J. Brown or Jordan Mason, you're just starting A.J. Brown quite easily. If it's a situation like you're taking, since it's all relative, if you're taking Jordan Mason, right, or Kendry Miller, then clearly you're starting Jordan Mason as the touch-based boomer bust. But in a situation like A.J. Brown, that's not a question. That's absolutely A.J. Brown. Kendry Miller or Malik Washington as a stash. It honestly just depends what you need. If you would like a running back, Kendry Miller's share of teams carries, 7 and 11 carries the last 2 games, has increased every week. That's also because they've just healthy scratched Devin Neal the last 2 games too. So they are more willing to keep Kendry Miller involved as an early down runner alongside Alvin Kamara. I don't expect Kamara's target share and route participation to ever go away entirely. That's his strength. That's what he does better than Kendry Miller. But I do think getting Miller involved is actually good for Kamara's health and longevity the rest of the season. So, just depends what you need. Malik Washington, I am a little bit worried about, I'll tell you, because he's only run 4 routes and 2 wide receiver sets all year. Even last week when Tyreek Hill got injured on Monday Night Football, Malik Washington didn't play in 2 wide receiver sets. That was Nick Westbrook-Akine. So I think what's going to happen is that everyone's going to be displeased with the amount of Nick Westbrook-Akine they see play over Malik Washington, and we shouldn't be shocked that's going to happen. Not to mention that only Greg Dortch in the entire NFL has a lower depth of target than Malik Washington, and Dortch is at negative yards per target. And those type of players, they don't have ceilings because they only get peppered near the line of scrimmage. That's why Khalil Shakir, top 12, is never in his range of outcomes as a player you draft because he gets peppered near the line of scrimmage as a possession guy, not an actual downfield ceiling threat. So I am a little bit worried about Malik Washington, but if you need a wide receiver over a running back, feel free to stash him. Anonymous asked on the stashes, in this case, Trevor Etienne or Jaden Blue. And just given the run out for Carolina, that Chuba Hubbard is injured, and now we have Rico Dowdle starting for the next 2 weeks, there is at least that ambiguous situation where Etienne can be the pass-catching back behind Dowdle, plus gets the contingency weight if Dowdle were injured. Whereas Jaden Blue now, we don't know if he's the pass-catching back, and we believe it's going to take a Javonte Williams injury to truly get Jaden Blue into the starting lineup. So I think Etienne is the better stash there. Start 3, Mr. Magic Ass, between Rico Dowdle, Chase Brown, Tony Pollard, and Michael Pittman, who has since been cleared. And have we seen Tajay Spears' injury report? Is he going to be active? Questionable for Sunday, still on injured reserve. Okay, so we don't think he's going to play most likely. If that's the case, again, as someone who rosters Tony Pollard in a lot of leagues, I can tell you there's nothing worse than rostering Chase Brown might be worse than Tony Pollard, because it's two players you're forced to start, even though they don't do anything. You have to start them for their touches, but you're just equally overwhelmed or underwhelmed every single week by their production. So, unfortunately, I'm going to take the running backs here and Rico Dowdle, Chase Brown, and Tony Pollard to start 3 over Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman removed from the injury report today, so we think he's fine. But I'm also worried about that game script entirely because the Raiders are in a very bad place. The one thing the Colts do well on defense is rush the passer and get after you because they have elite talent in their front 7. And now the Raiders, without Colton Miller, not only flipped the script as being a more run-heavy team last week, but it's a bad situation for Geno Smith against this front 7. I know that total keeps coming up. I don't agree with it at all. I'm really worried about the Raiders' offense this week, especially if Brock Bowers does not play. So I'm just going to start the running backs. Need a dart throw wide receiver this week between Rob H. asks, Malik Washington, Josh Downs, Christian Kirk, and Isaiah Bond. I'm not going to include the Cowboys wide receivers in there. I think it is Malik Washington, if only because Josh Downs only gets on the field if, as a slot receiver, they've shown us that when Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce play, that A.D. Mitchell is the one who comes into the game and plays over Josh Downs, as he did last week. And now with Alec Pierce back, that's 4 players we're talking about, 3 which are roadblocks for Josh Downs. So I think it's Malik Washington. Again, it's a desperate play. None of them are really good options, but that's where we are in week 5. So I'd much rather take what I believe is going to be a shootout between the Panthers and Dolphins for however much the Panthers and Dolphins shoot out. Carolina's creating the lowest pressure rate in the league, which makes it easier for the passing game of the Dolphins. The Dolphins are doing nothing but allowing top 12 performances to opposing quarterbacks, which makes it an easy situation for Bryce Young and Ted McMillan in the passing game there. So I, at the very least, like the environment for Carolina and Miami much more than any of these other options. Isaiah Bond's interesting, but only as a 12-team, 8-bench kind of stash. We've now seen 4 games for the Browns. Jerry Jeudy hasn't led their wide receivers. Not just team, only the wide receivers room in fantasy points at any point. Cedric Tillman, and Isaiah Bond last week have led Jerry Jeudy in fantasy points in every game. And the Browns have the lowest team total on the board from a rookie quarterback overseas in London on Sunday morning. The lowest team total of all teams in week 5. Not only that, but Brian Flores has gone 5-0 with 19 sacks and 13.5 points per game allowed the rookie quarterbacks in his 2.5-year tenure with the Vikings as DC. So not really interested in Isaiah Bond outside of just being a stash this week. As I mentioned, Minsky, Rico Dowdle definitely over Michael Pittman for the touches and terrific matchup against a very bad Miami rushing defense. Who should I start? Fahey asks. Between Chase Brown, Rashad White, Woody Marks, or Jerry Jeudy, and that is Woody Marks for me. Again, the best situation possible. Ravens allowing a league high in catches per game to running backs. That is Woody Marks' role, even outside of naturally out-carrying Nick Chubb's last week. And then after the game, D'Amico Ryan's head coach couldn't stop raving about Woody Marks, especially because Marks is also their best pass-catching running back. Or I'm sorry, their best pass-blocking running back. Not to mention that 58% share of team touches, think about it. A share of team touches among their backfield that has increased in every game, and he's only at 58% so far as his ceiling. Obviously, he can go significantly higher than that. So we haven't even seen Woody Marks' ceiling just yet. And this week against a very horrific Ravens defense that's just banged up across the board is the time to see it. So I'm starting Woody Marks. Raven Terp asks, better rest of season, Juwan Johnson or Dalton Kincaid? And I think it's Juwan Johnson, assuming he's healthy. We could be getting back Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau. But remember, they gave Juwan Johnson $18+ million in guaranteed money in free agency. This is a guy who's not coming off the field, as he's shown us this first month of the season. And so I do think Taysom Hill would be worked in intricately, but also remember, Taysom Hill's not a tight end. He's listed as a tight end for fantasy. That's not what he does. He's a running back, wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback who just fantasy listed tight end, so he doesn't actually overlap in line with Juwan Johnson at all. Taysom Hill, if anything, raises the ceiling of New Orleans' offense without taking away from Juwan Johnson. So I like stashing Taysom Hill, and I like Juwan Johnson more than Dalton Kincaid, since Buffalo has shown us everyone will lead in target share sporadically throughout the week as they continue to use 6 different players on offense. At times, it's been Dalton Kincaid with a touchdown, but Dalton Kincaid's consistent target share is not something we believe in given how spread out the offense is. Dowdle or Slayton? Jimbo Fisher asked, and you're definitely just starting Rico Dowdle for the guaranteed touches. Whereas Darius Slayton, I love. I think he's the best sleeper of week 5. We now saw 2 starts without Malik Neighbors last year, and Darius Slayton averaged a 29% target share for 19.5 points per game in those 2 starts. Otherwise, around Malik Neighbors last year, he was unusable with just 5.2 fantasy points. And that makes sense because Darius Slayton is an X receiver. And when you have an X receiver, a guy you can leave on an island, as great as Malik Neighbors, the other X receiver obviously doesn't get targeted because Malik Neighbors earns every target. But Wan'Dale Robinson doesn't come in for Malik Neighbors. That's not who Wan'Dale Robinson is, as he showed us last year as well, whenever Malik Neighbors missed those 2 games. It is Darius Slayton downfield. And the Saints, in terms of EPA per play to opposing wide receiver ones, which is what Slayton is, they're literally dead last in the league in production. So I love Darius Slayton, but I can also zoom out from my own opinions and note that Darius Slayton is, in fact, a sleeper and not a guarantee, just someone that we're trying to be ahead of. Whereas Rico Dowdle's touches are guaranteed. So you just take those. Lost Tyreek Trone Force asks, and need wide receivers. So I think he's asking to start 3 among Devonta, Olave, Travis Hunter, and Kupp. I think that's the case because McLaurin is out and DK Metcalf is on bye. So really this becomes a bench one question and you're benching Cooper Kupp. In fact, you're probably dropping Cooper Kupp outright. Since Kupp so far in 4 games with the Seahawks, the wide receiver 86, 21, 67, and 55. In other words, unusable through his first 4 games. Flex Judkins or Rico Dowdle and continue flexing Quinshon Judkins. You do not worry about Rico Dowdle when you have an every touch starter like Quinshon Judkins. Not only has his share of the team's backfield touches increased in every game, Judkins has, his route participation has also increased in every game. And unlike past years, Minnesota's front 7 is susceptible. Again, I think the Browns win that game, and I think they do it because of 2 players, Judkins and Harold Fannin, but also because their defense is going to crush Carson Wentz. But mostly Judkins because, as we saw just last week, Kenneth Gainwell, the RB3, and that's already the second top 8 finish the Vikings have allowed to running backs through just 4 games. So I like Judkins a lot. Among all the RBs Raven Terp asks that I discussed at the beginning of the show, who's a better long-term stash? ROS, since we're talking about, well, I mean, Woody Marks is obviously the best one because Woody Marks is a weekly starter, not a stash. But ROS, when you're discussing Bucky Irving and Chuba Hubbard only missing 2 games, Braylon Allen missing the next 6 to 8 weeks, if not longer, and Rashad White and Michael Carter. I think the best stash is probably Michael Carter. But if you're not starting him, I also think the Cardinal situation is ambiguous enough to just ignore it, since everyone's assuming it's either Michael Carter or Amari DiMercado. When again, if Bam Knight is also involved, then we're kind of stuck with nothing. So if you're not planning on starting the Cardinals running backs, I'd probably skip all of them and go straight to Brashad Smith as a stash over Sean Tucker and Trevor Etienne. And I don't mention Rashad White and Dowdle there because they're not stashes anymore. They're weekly starters. Troneforth asks now, feeding off of what I said, to pick up Nick Westbrook-Akine, and I don't think you need to pick him up. I just only mention that because it's most likely to cannibalize Malik Washington. But I also don't think Westbrook-Akine is someone we need to worry about picking up. Also, the chat's updating me on Alec Pierce's concussion. And did he get ruled out again? He practiced in full throughout the week. Oh, no. He got ruled out again. Oh, A.D. Mitchell. It's wheels up for A.D. Mitchell. Led the team in receiving yards now. Going back to last year, A.D. Mitchell ran a route on 95% of dropbacks. I mentioned this last week as well on Friday whenever people asked about A.D. Mitchell. Yeah, I like A.D. Mitchell a lot this week. That's good news. I'll have to update the waiver wire for that. Let's see here. Got offered Bowers for Worthy. I would not do that just because Worthy is going to be a sell high option here in a couple weeks before Rashee Rice returns in week 7. We get the ceiling run out for the next couple of games, but after that, Worthy is the inferior player based on what they've shown us together in a small sample, but in the 57 plays, Worthy and Rashee Rice have overlapped. Rashee Rice has a 40% target share to Worthy's 19%. Not to mention that think about like who they were at the beginning of their careers too. Worthy as a rookie finished 76th in yards per out run. Rashee Rice as a rookie finished 10th among all wide receivers. Rice is just very clearly the superior player whenever they share the field. So Worthy's going to be a player you should enjoy the ceiling the next couple of weeks, but then sell high before Rice returns. So I would not. Oh, in this case, I guess if you're getting Bowers, I would take Bowers. Yes. Since we're expecting Bowers' knee injury to be a thing of the past in a couple games. Best upside in the second half of the season between RJ Harvey, Zach Charbonnet, Bashal Tootin, and Kendre Miller. I think it's RJ Harvey, best upside. Kenneth Walker is still a thorn in Charbonnet's side, and vice versa, Charbonnet a thorn in Walker's side in a timeshare. RJ Harvey, we saw this past game. It wasn't just like Trevor Etienne, right? You log in, you see the box score, but all that was junk time, and we're ignoring it. RJ Harvey actually out-touched J.K. Dobbins in the first half, too. And that resulted in a season-high 50% share of backfield touches for Harvey. So you would think after how explosive he was on Monday night, catching a touchdown as well, that gives him a bigger role moving forward. So definitely RJ Harvey. Bashal Tootin is still a guy who you need an injury to happen, but if that injury were to happen, he's quite literally a top 12 running back in an explosive running scheme under Liam Cohen. And of course, for Tootin's combined high of all time since the metrics were kept, athleticism, especially among the most athletic running back class that was ever tested too. Adrian Peterson asked, what do I think about Jalen Coker? And honestly, I just don't have opinions on Jalen Coker. The injury was still much more gruesome at the beginning of the year. We were expected to not have him till week 8. I'm still expecting that. It doesn't sound like he's going to be active the next couple of weeks. So I don't think I have an opinion on Jalen Coker, especially because I don't think he's anyone who, I think there's room for one player to succeed from this version of Bryce Young. I don't think Bryce Young can support 2 players. And so we're getting that one player, even the one player, Ted McMillan, struggling to produce from Bryce Young. But I don't think he can support 2. And obviously a UDFA is not coming for Ted McMillan's target share. So I don't care as much for Coker as a lot of people do, just because we can't extrapolate those splits from last year because a first-round wide receiver who comps to Mike Evans and Ted McMillan was not on the team last year. Thoughts on Jakobi Meyers' ROS? Not really any thoughts, except he's still a great wide receiver weekly, a wide receiver 2 weekly for PPR leagues. Like this past week, we saw him still lead the team with 7 targets, and he's had at least 27% of the Raiders' targets in 3 of their 4 games. Week 3, he was at 14.8%, but beyond that, all Jakobi Meyers does is earn targets. So I still think he's a great wide receiver 2 weekly and undervalued in PPR leagues. Not much more to say beyond that, especially because guys like Trey Tucker, Dante Thornton, like they're not coming for Jakobi Meyers' job. Flex, Rashad White, Rico Dowdle, or T. Higgins, full PPR. I will flex Rashad White, although I do have faith for the Bengals wide receivers for the first time ever. You shouldn't sell, by the way, Chase Brown and T. Higgins right now. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins right now, because the exact run out we projected happened. Like we knew, to go back to this show 2 weeks ago, we knew we couldn't start Jake Browning against the Vikings. We knew that. We knew we couldn't start Jake Browning against the Broncos. We knew that. And the exact run out for those offenses happened as we expected. They did nothing. But now you get a softer, not like a league floor poor Lions defense, but a very soft Lions defense compared to the Vikings and Broncos at home. The Lions are also blitzing at a league high rate, and in a very small sample, Jake Browning's gone 9 of 12 for 8.5 yards per attempt against the blitz. And the targets, best of all, only go to 2 places. Jamar Chase has a 30% target share. T. Higgins, 19%. Noah Fant, the next closest, is at 9.5%. So 50% of Jake Browning's targets are going to 2 guys, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. The ceiling is clearly not the same as if Joe Burrow was under center, but we're going to finally see a normal Jake Browning game and what that can look like, in my opinion, against the Lions. And if this is the case, you don't want to sell Jamar Chase and T. Higgins at their lowest points, at rock bottom, after what we expected to happen did happen. Like, let's wait. And if you don't have faith, even if Jamar Chase has, like, let's say 60 yards and a touchdown, you move him then. But even a touchdown is going to increase his value at what is now an all-time low. So you sit it out and wait with Chase and Higgins. But Rashad White, the best start among those three. Dowdle and Higgins. Trimble or Fannin for tight end. And I think Tommy Tremble is actually a better start. Like, I like Harold Fannin, don't get me wrong. But we've now seen 12.5 and 15.5 fantasy points for Tommy Tremble in his last two starts in place of Jatavian Sanders. And as we've seen every tight end do against the Dolphins, even Mason Taylor, of all people, Mason Taylor, season high in receiving yards and target share against the Dolphins. Tommy Tremble, he's going to be out there every snap. He's a top 12 streamer, even though rankings don't have that because he doesn't have the name value. Tommy Tremble's a top 12 streamer this week for sure. Having said that, I do like Harold Fannin. Like, you're forcing me to pick, but otherwise, in any other situation, like Harold Fannin or T.J. Hawkinson, I'm starting Harold Fannin for sure. T.J. Hawkinson is the tight end 21 in points per game, a droppable asset. Whereas Harold Fannin now, the entire argument the entire time has been because in a poor passing offense, the target tree just isn't there. And that's been true so far. But now we're removing Cedric Tillman from the share of the pie. So this thing goes down to 4 players. Not only that, but the Vikings run zone coverage at the 4th highest rate in the league, 78% of their snaps. And Harold Fannin is 10th in yards per route run with 28% of his targets against zone coverage compared to 21st in yards per route run against man coverage. So I love not to mention they gave Fannin a carry last week, like the Colts are using Tyler Warren. So I think Fannin could have a really, really good week, but I do think Tommy Tremble is safer, relative to however safe Tommy Tremble can be in a better matchup. Sit 1. Chase Brown, Rico Dowdle, RJ Harvey, Kendry Miller, Amari DiMercato. Oh, you can sit Kendry Miller. He just doesn't have the projected touches as the others. Like, you would only in this case discuss sitting one of Kendry Miller or DiMercato. The rest don't count because they're not even in the same tier as those guys. But DiMercato, I always mention on this show because it's true. Targets are worth 1.5 fantasy points. Carries are worth 1. You always want to lean towards the pass catching back when splitting hairs. Plus, DiMercato has a range of outcomes. That includes out carrying Michael Carter. We do not know. No one knows, despite being overconfident, what's going to happen with the Cardinals' backfield. And so, in this case, given that his floor is running routes, DiMercato's, but his ceiling is leading the Cardinals in touches, I'll just start that over Kendry Miller, who will get carries, but Kamara is not going away from the pass-catching role. Uncle, let's see here. No. Where did that go? Oh, Ari Clipper, who's always here, asked Troy Franklin or Malik Washington. I'll go Troy Franklin because he's the opposite of Malik Washington, whereas Franklin, at the very least, the route participation has stuck around despite the production not being there the last 2 games. Like, Franklin is still running around on 80% of the dropbacks in every game so far. He's been used as the Broncos wide receiver 2. That has not gone away, although Marvin Mims outproduced him last week on Monday night. But Troy Franklin is still the one who's on the field far more than Marvin Mims. 20-plus percentage points more. So I still like Troy Franklin, whereas Malik Washington is a shot in the dark, who, again, at least based on this year and last year, is not going to play in 2 wide receiver sets. Rico Dowdle or Jamison Williams? Gosh, that's a tough one. Rico Dowdle has the higher floor, but I don't think I care about floor when you're talking about a ceiling player like Jameson Williams. Like the Lions, when we talk about team totals, let's check here. I think it's the highest of the week. Jameson Williams also, let's see here. Yeah. The Lions are the only team in week 5 projected to score 30 points by market. So we're latching on to that environment with Jameson Williams. Not to mention, it's kind of the perfect situation. Like we saw Marvin Mims had success where you can scheme up Jameson Williams close to the line of scrimmage to get him targets and man coverage and allow him to do his thing from there. He's also a player who's underperforming his expected fantasy points because the usage and being Detroit's wide receiver 2 every single game has been there. The on-field usage, just the target share has not followed just yet. But when we're talking about his prospects last year, think about it. He had a career high 17.5% target share. This year he's at 16%. Not a big difference. But his route participation's higher this year. So we'll take that negligent dip in target share and add on more on-field participation to make rest of season a better player. So I do think Jameson Williams is still in a buy low spot, and the ceiling is so much higher than Dowdle. I'm going to start him over Dowdle. Woody Marks or Cortland Sutton, and gosh, that's tough. I think it's Cortland Sutton. As much as I love Woody Marks, Cortland Sutton's targets are guaranteed, as they are every week. He's seen at least 22% of Denver's targets in 13 of his last 14 games. That's a giant sample. Whereas, again, as much as I love Woody Marks, 4 games, 58% share of backfield touches, a season-high mark. If I'm trying to play devil's advocate, which I'm not in most cases, I'm only doing it because you're asking the tough question. Like, what if he only increases to 60%? What if it's a blowout and so Nick Chubb explodes for one, even though Nick Chubb really doesn't explode for runs? So I will start Cortland Sutton, but only because that's a tough question. Would I rather have Woody Marks or Rashee Rice rest of season? Definitely Rashee Rice. Remember, Rashee Rice was the wide receiver 3 in points per game last year before he got injured. And if you go all the way back to post Kansas City's bye when he was a rookie, so basically his last 13 games, including the postseason, Rashee Rice was the wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game. Rashee Rice was a player who should have been drafted in the 2nd round had he not been suspended. So that is very clearly better than Woody Marks. Thoughts on Turpin versus Tolbert? Thoughts are I want to walk into the ocean. Because Turpin might be injured, but also Jalen Tolbert, like it's been fine. 13%, 18% target share, deep sleeper. But also, we know Jalen Tolbert's career, a majority of his production last week came on that prayer, that Hail Mary heave Dak Prescott had in the 4th quarter to go down and tie the game. Sideline shot that was beautiful, but Jalen Tolbert's not really anyone you want to start outside of like 14-team desperation. Bucky, Rashad White, JSN. Oh, for JSN. No. I'd much rather have JSN. Jackson Smith and Jigba continues to be a cheat code. He's like the very poor man's version of Puka Nacua. That's how great JSN has been. Not only that, but the Bucs are also one of those teams suffering cluster injuries this week, including Jamel Dean, their cornerback. And with Jamel Dean off the field last year, the Bucs dropped to 8.3 yards per attempt, dead last in the league, allowed to opposing wide receivers. So now JSN, not only a top 6 wide receiver this week, but rest of season, the leash is just so long to be one of the best wide receiver picks, fantasy picks at his position. Rob H just circles back quickly. Yeah, I'll start Josh Downs over Malik Washington now that Alec Pierce is ruled out. That's fine. Better start this week, Jordan Mason or Rico Dowdle. It's Rico Dowdle. We talked about Jordan Mason at the top of the show. Uncle Ted got some new white boots today. That's great. That sounds incredible. Waddle for Rashee Rice. I would still take Rashee Rice just because. So Jalen Waddle made one start without Tyreek Hill last year, and it's exactly what you expected. 6.1 yards per route run, 130 yards and a touchdown. I think it was let me double check here before citing this. I think it was a 34% target share in that game against the Jets, which happened on Black Friday, I believe it was. Let's see here. Waddle, without Tyreek Hill last year, had a 34.6% target share, 142 yards and a touchdown, 88% of Miami's air yards, 6.1 yards per route run. So I was dead on. Having said that, it's still Rashee Rice. And there's the chance, the high likelihood actually, but like we still love Waddle rest of season without Tyreek Hill. But there is the chance we need to be aware of that the entire bottom could fall out of Miami's offense as a whole without Tyreek Hill since he's been their best player. So, love Jalen Waddle, don't get me wrong, but not as a Rashee Rice caliber player as I talked about earlier with Rice. Nate Deasy, one more week to plug in for George Kittle, even though George Kittle sounds like he may miss week 6 as well. Harold Fannin or Darren Waller? That's Harold Fannin for me. Darren Waller, don't get me wrong, like that was awesome to see that. To only run around on 36% of dropbacks, score 2 touchdowns on a team-high 3 end zone targets, which is what you expect from a big-bodied receiving option like him. But the range of outcomes are still extremely wild, given 33 years old, missed the first 3 games with an injury, and only 36% of dropbacks. I don't think it's fair to just say, to spit out, that it just increases from round forward, because we don't know that. Again, given that age and the apex he's already shown us in missing football for a calendar year. So I think that Harold Fannin is the one. A couple quick more rapid fire before I get out of here. Jordan Addison or Darius Slayton? And I'm going to go Darius Slayton, honestly. I think the matchup is better. Since we're talking about a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, I'm a little more confident in my own personal projection for Slayton. So I'm going to go Slayton over him, even though rankings, again, will not show that for name value. Which 2 are you packaging for an upgrade between Keenan Allen, Ricky Pearsall, and Deebo Samuel? I'd package Keenan Allen and Deebo Samuel only because it seems like Deebo Samuel, that target share likely decreases whenever Terry McLaurin comes back. And for Keenan Allen, I'm just worried about the Chargers offense in general. Justin Herbert's actually been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league under pressure this year. 30th. No. Let's quickly check this. Justin Herbert under pressure this year. 30th in completion rate, 27th in yards per attempt. And whenever Joe Alt was carted off last week, he was under pressure on 50% of his dropbacks. Washington is creating pressure at the league's highest rate. Like, I do think it's a situation where the Chargers offense begins failing now. And as we saw last week, the Chargers are still like top 7 in pass rate over expectation. But I do not expect that to continue because they can't hide Justin Herbert behind that offensive line anymore. So Keenan Allen is someone I'm trying to sell high. I still don't mind taking on Ladd McConkey just because, again, when the dust settles, we still naturally think Ladd McConkey is the best wide receiver for the Chargers. Quentin Johnston isn't going anywhere. He's proved he's a third-year developing first-round wide receiver. That's okay. He's doing great, and I think he can sustain. But I still think Ladd McConkey is the best on his team naturally. And you can get McConkey for pennies, which is what I like whenever you're talking about first-round talent. So I still like trading low for McConkey there. But I'm definitely trying to ship off Keenan Allen high right now. And then finally, before I get out of here, let's see here. What's another good one? What's a good one to end on? Pick one to start. Oh, this is easy, Armin. You know better than this question. You start Drake May every week. Drake May is the rising sun, the QB4 in points per game, and also now gets a miserable Buffalo defense that just doesn't have the speed. Like, you can even tell when watching them. They don't have the athleticism to keep up with someone like Drake May. Buffalo is still dead last in the league in explosive run rate allowed. I guess, well, first in the league, highest rate of 10-yard carries allowed because they have the worst rushing defense in the entire league. So I really like Drake May this week. How about this? Toby asked, Mark Andrews, Theo Johnson, Tommy Tremble, or Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson, if he plays. If not, I think it is Tommy Tremble. We saw Mark Andrews last week. Just a 71% route participation in the first 3 games. And then last week with Isaiah Likely active for the first time, 51% route participation. Not great. And now we're talking about Cooper Rush with a projected team total that's the second lowest in the league fourth lowest in the league. I'm sorry, 16.5 points, just ahead of the Browns and Raiders. So hate the outlook for Ravens offense against the Houston Texans this week. Remember, for more questions, you can follow me at NotJDaigle on Twitter. It's in the notes down there. And of course, at Establish a Run, where I write the waiver wire column and talk about a lot of these things throughout the week in the Discord too. So until then, good luck this week. And the only rule is to hit the like button for sure and be a little bit kinder than what's required. I'll see y'all next time.